there's a lot of situations in our life that we escape from, situations that we get involved in, situations that we place ourselves in, decide that we don't want to be here, and we do behaviors to escape from that situation. However, there's another category of even more frequent behaviors, and these are the ones where we avoid an unpleasant situation. And in both cases, negative reinforcement is involved, and we are now going to take a look at how negative reinforcement accounts for both escape and avoidance. Hi, I'm Dr. Igor Juricevic, and this is Functional Analysis of Behavior 1. Let's go. All right, so this is our second video on negative reinforcement. If you haven't watched the first one, I highly recommend pause this video and check it out before going on. But just as a quick reminder, Cooper, Heron, and Heward mentioned that a negative reinforcement contingency is one in which the occurrence of a response produces the termination, reduction, postponement, or avoidance of a stimulus, which leads to an increase in the future occurrence of that response. So it's a negative contingency because something is taken away, something is subtracted from the environment, and it's reinforcement because whatever behavior led to the takeaway, that behavior increases in the future, hence negative reinforcement. Now, you'll notice that negative reinforcement is a contingency where a response produces sometimes the termination of an event and sometimes the avoidance of an event. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Termination being the escape from an event and avoidance being the avoidance of that event. All right, so let's go back to the 4-term contingency for negative reinforcement. And we are going to start with what we looked at last time, which is actually the escape contingency. So the escape contingency, let's bring down that hand of fate. And I really hope I'm looking in the right direction here. All right, the escape contingency was what we went through last time. So let's go through it one more time, now labeling it as the escape contingency. So we're going to take a look at 3 different contingencies. One of them escape, 2 of them avoidance. So let's start with that escape one. So in the escape contingency, you have the establishing operation. And this is what makes it an escape contingency, because the event that you are trying to avoid, that event that you are seeking to avoid, or that escape from that would be reinforcing, that is already occurring. You're already in it. So in the escape contingency, you are already experiencing those establishing operations. And then you see the discriminative stimulus, the stimulus that indicates that a response is likely to be reinforced. You then produce the response. The response is followed by reinforcement, and where that establishing operation is escape from the establishing operation, and that is the 4-term escape contingency for negative reinforcement. So again, the easiest way to understand this is that you are in the establishing operation, and then you escape from the establishing operation. So you've experienced the establishing operation, but then you escape from the establishing operation, hence negative reinforcement escape contingency. So the other type of contingency is the avoidance contingency. So there are actually 2 types of avoidance contingencies, and the key here is that you never actually experience the establishing operation in avoidance contingencies. So we're going to take a look at the first kind, which is discriminative avoidance. And this is so called because there is a discriminative stimulus that indicates that establishing operations are likely to start occurring. It's a discriminative stimulus that indicates that something that you are going to want to eventually escape from is going to occur in the near future. So you see a discriminative stimulus. Once you see that discriminative stimulus, but before the establishing operation event occurs, you produce a response. And that response avoids the establishing operation, so the establishing operation never occurs, and therefore that response is reinforced. And we call this discriminative avoidance because it starts with that discriminative stimulus and it ends with a reinforcement where you actually avoid the establishing operation. All right, and the last one we're going to take a look at in this avoidance contingencies is free operant avoidance. And free operant avoidance is still an avoidance contingency. It's still a contingency where you never experience that establishing operation. But in this case, the behavior occurs in the absence of a discriminative stimulus. So in this case, without having that discriminative stimulus that an establishing operation is likely to occur, you produce a behavior, and that behavior causes the establishing operation to be avoided so it never occurs, and you are reinforced for that avoidance of the establishing operation. All right, so those are the three contingencies that we're going to take a look at. So let's put some real world examples to that. So for that, we're going to go back to our construction example. So in an escape contingency, what we would have, and again, we did this last time, so we'll do it one more time because repetition is good for the soul. So once again, your establishing operation is loud noise from the construction outside. And this is something that you would like to escape. This is something that you would like to avoid. And in this case, you're experiencing it. You hear the loud noise outside. You are already in the loud noise. The loud noise is part of your environment. So that is the establishing operation. The loud noise is there. The discriminative stimulus for reinforcement is that you see your roommate near the window. You ask your roommate to close the window. That is the response. Roommate closes the window. The noise subsides, so the noise terminates. You escape the noise, and then that reinforces the behavior of asking your roommate to close the window, so you are more likely to ask them to close the window in the future. So that asking to close the window behavior has been negatively reinforced in this escape contingency. Importantly, however, you escaped from the noise, you escaped from the establishing operation because it was already activated, it was already part of your environment. On the other hand, in the avoidance contingency, you never experience that establishing operation, at least not in that trial. So in this case, you start off with a discriminative stimulus that indicates that the establishing operation is about to occur. So in this example, you would see workers outside. They're not making noise yet, but there's construction workers outside. Maybe they're plugging in their tools. Maybe they're putting on their hard hats. They're definitely getting ready to work. That is your discriminative stimulus that noise is about to occur. You ask your roommate to close the window. The roommate closes the window. And in this case, the noise subsides, but you avoid the establishing operation. You avoid that loud construction noise completely. So this is an avoidance contingency. And once again, you are more likely to do this in the future, hence negative reinforcement. And then the final one is free operant avoidance. And this is where you avoid the establishing operation in the absence of any discriminative stimulus. So in this case, this would be an example of where you decide to close the window, even if you don't see construction workers outside. So maybe you didn't take a look out the window. Maybe you just got up in the morning and you thought to yourself, you know what? I'm just going to close the window to avoid any possible construction noises. So it's not that you saw anything. It's not that there's a discriminative stimulus to indicate that the establishing operation is on its way. However, you still ask your roommate to close the window. That's the behavior. The roommate closes the window. You avoid that establishing operation. You avoid that construction noise from outside. And that behavior of asking the roommate gets reinforced because the noise never occurred. And you now will do that. You will do that more often in the future, hence negative reinforcement. Now, the last thing that I'm going to mention for this video is you might be wondering to yourself, well, for avoidance contingencies, for discriminative avoidance, where you see the construction workers outside, or for free operant avoidance, where you don't even see the construction workers outside, you just ask your roommate to close the window, how would that ever be reinforcing if you've never experienced the establishing operation? And this is where the last point is going to come in, and that is that in negative reinforcement, it typically goes from escape to avoidance. So when an individual is first being negatively reinforced, typically they first experience escape. You first experience the construction noise, asking your roommate to close the window, and then they close it. And then eventually that escape behavior turns into avoidance behavior, where you don't wait until the construction noise occurs. You just avoid it by either discriminative avoidance or free operant avoidance. So this is a typical kind of learning progression under negative reinforcement. It typically starts off under escape contingency conditions and then gradually shifts over to avoidance contingency. So in the end, you will have experience establishing operations, but you will go from an escape contingency where you experience those establishing operations to an avoidance contingency where you no longer experience the establishing operations, so you don't escape from it. Rather, you avoid the establishing operations altogether. All right, so that's it for today's video. We took a look at escape contingencies. We took a look at avoidance contingencies and negative reinforcement. We took a look at 3 real-world examples of how those would occur in a construction worker, you living in an apartment and your roommate is on the window situation. Very specific situation, but once again, nice illustration. Anyways, next time we're going to be taking a look at schedules of reinforcement. So we've been talking about reinforcing. Now we're going to take a look at how often do you reinforce and what are your options in terms of how often you reinforce and what are the consequences of how often you reinforce. But until then, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you next time. Stay frosty, stay functional. Let's bring down that hand of fate. And I really hope I'm looking in the right direction here.